Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to do kind of like a final wrap up of my thoughts on War and Peace. So I did a things you might want to know before you start War and Peace video, so I'll link that in case you want to watch it. I did that video when I was about halfway through the book, and it's just some things that you might want to know going into it, some things I wish I had known to maybe better prepare me for reading it. Also talk about translations, all that kind of stuff is in that video. So I'm not going to talk about any of those things here. I'm only just going to talk about my final thoughts on the book itself. I did briefly talk about War and Peace in my wrap-up video for March because I finished this book in March. It took me January, February, and March to finish it because it's a long one, and I easily could have taken another month to finish it. But I wanted to share some things that I liked about the book, some things I didn't like about the book, all that kind of stuff. These final thoughts will be spoiler free, so if you have not read War and Peace, never fear, I'm not going to spoil any major plot points or anything like that, so you can watch this and see my thoughts, see if maybe, you know, the things that I liked and didn't like, maybe you feel differently and you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to read that, or yeah, I definitely do. So if you don't know anything about War and Peace, it's written by Leo Tolstoy, who is a Russian author, and it basically follows like Napoleon's conquests into Russia and, you know, just the wars between Russia and France at the time. It culminates in 1812, I think, when Napoleon, you know, takes Moscow and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of historical context that I didn't know going into it, but I feel like Tolstoy does a really great job of interspersing a lot of historical information throughout, which is really helpful. So that is something that I liked, but also something that I did not like, if that makes sense, which it doesn't, but I'm gonna explain it. So I liked it because I feel like it did help, because I don't know anything historically about this time period whatsoever. So I felt like that was really helpful, but it was also very jarring. His transitions were not very smooth between historical and then fictional things. So we're following a very wide cast of characters, so there's a lot of switching around anyway, and most of these characters, their families end up interconnecting, so you see how they're all connected and all that kind of stuff. So it does narrow in as we go, but even so, you're switching between probably like 4 or 5 like main characters, and then you switch between them to these scenes of Russian generals and like the governor of Moscow, and then you switch to Napoleon himself and the Emperor Alexander and their interactions, and there's a lot. So I feel like those transitions honestly were very rough. You would be like really into the plot, and then all of a sudden we leave the plot entirely. And that was really, really difficult. That was something that I didn't enjoy, but I did like having the historical context. So I think it's valuable. And I think that if I knew more history, maybe I would have been more invested in those scenes, but those scenes were really difficult for me to get through. Another thing I loved about this story was just the characters, and some of them I didn't like at all at first, to be totally honest. Prince Andrei being a big one. I just wasn't sure how I was going to feel about him, but I grew to love him as time went on, and there was a lot of redemption in this story for those characters who were difficult to like or seemed like they didn't have much going on. You know, one of the characters, Pierre, he is on this quest for meaning in his life, and he looks in all these different places, and I feel like the character arc of him was just so well written, and I feel like Tolstoy writes redemption very, very well of these characters, and I just really liked that because I feel like there was at least 2 very obvious characters and another one sort of who had like these very serious like redemption arcs where they really seek for the meaning of life and really find it. And so I really like how Tolstoy writes that. I think he does such a great job of writing like the quest for meaning and happiness, and he does this as well in Anna Karenina with one of the main characters in that novel, and that's just something that I feel like he writes really well. I like his philosophical and religious thoughts and explorations in his books. Those are some of like my favorite things that he writes about. And another thing that he writes really, really well is human emotion. He does such a great job of writing grief in particular in this book. There was just some very moving scenes towards the last like quarter of the book or so of people just deeply impacted by grief, and I think that he did such an excellent job of exploring that and what it looks like to walk through that. One thing that bothered me in terms of human emotion that he wrote is I didn't love for a really long time how he was writing love, because he would write these people that they fall in love with each other, and then they get married or whatever, just express their love, and then it's gone like that. Like, it's so fleeting, which results in a lot of unhappy relationships or unhappy marriages. But then when we get to the end and people kind of like end up with their final people and it's the real deal and it's really love, it's written so well. And I really loved that. So I kind of throughout the course of the novel, I was like, I really do not like how he's writing relationships, how he's writing love. But then once he gets to like real stable relationships where it's like really truly love, it's so beautiful and it's so well done. Although I have to say, those scenes at the end where certain people end up in their final relationships, I felt like the buildup was written really well, but then we don't get like the proposal or the marriage or anything like that. Then we have an epilogue where we skip forward like probably 10 years or something to where they've been married for a while and they have multiple children, and you're just like, oh, I didn't love that. I'll also say with the ending, there were some characters that I didn't like their ending. I feel like some people got a happy ending, and then there were people who I really felt got gypped and did not have a satisfactory ending. Not that I feel like everyone has to have a happy ending, because I actually prefer books that everyone doesn't have a happy ending. I like it when some of the main characters die, when there are battle scenes, when there are wars, when there's stuff going on, because that just feels realistic. It doesn't feel realistic to say there's a war going on and everyone made it out okay. Like, that just doesn't make sense. And Tolstoy, definitely, not everyone has a happy ending. And I'm totally fine with that. But there was a couple of characters that I just felt like their ending was just kind of like not even really included. And I felt like they kind of got the short end of the stick, despite the fact that they were very prominent throughout the book. So that was just a little disappointing for me as well. Also, I read this book with Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, and a big complaint for her when she finished was the second epilogue, because there are 2 epilogues. She kept saying that it wasn't necessary. And I agree, because the first epilogue follows all the characters, like I said, about like 10 years later or something like that. And then there's a second epilogue, which is essentially just Tolstoy philosophizing about how much of things are actually inevitable and how much free will we actually have. And it was interesting, and I really liked his thoughts because I like how Tolstoy explores philosophy, and I felt like he kind of landed in the same area that I do when I think about these kinds of things, like how much of things are like completely out of our control and how much do we really have free will. Like, he has a whole section where he talks about, like, you'd say you have the free will to raise your arm and you go ahead and do it, but like if the things around you were arranged in a different way, you might not have the ability to do it at that moment. And just like little stuff like that, that he's like, how much does your circumstances actually dictate your free will? It's just like, I liked it, but I don't think it needed to be part of the story in the way that it was. I don't think that it should have been an epilogue. And that's what I was saying to Stephanie. I was like, I actually was interested in it because I really like spiritual and religious nonfiction. So that's kind of where he went with it. In his philosophizing, he made it very spiritual because he was a Christian. So I really enjoyed his exploration of that. But an epilogue denotes a continuation of the story. And this was not a continuation of the story at all. We had a good, I can't even remember how long it was. It was at least probably 40, 50 pages, this last epilogue. Maybe it was shorter. I don't know, but it was kind of long, and it didn't have anything to do with the story at all. It's just an exploration of what he thought of war and free will and all that kind of stuff. And so I felt like it would have done better because it was essentially like an essay. I think it would have been better as like an author's note / afterword, or like an introduction to the book, like one of those things, or just published separately as a separate essay. And while I really, really enjoyed War and Peace, glad I read it, and I think I probably will reread it sometime in the future, I felt like this book could have been a lot shorter. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with me because it's very beloved and known as this great masterpiece for a reason. But there was just whole chunks that didn't seem like they really had to be there. And then it felt like at the end that the payoff wasn't quite worth all the work that went into it. Or at least it didn't line up to my personal expectations. I should say that way, because I think other people will feel differently. It was interesting because Stephanie kept comparing it to Anna Karenina, which is very valid because Tolstoy also wrote Anna Karenina, is also very long. But I kept coming back to when I read Les Miserables last summer by Victor Hugo, because Victor Hugo would go on these tangents that were somewhat historically or socially relevant at the time, but weren't actually like part of the plot. So we'd take breaks from the plot with our fictional characters to go into these things that were just like, okay, but I really want to get back to the plot. And I felt like Tolstoy kind of did that too with some of the historical stuff that he did, where, you know, we would be really invested in the plot and in this family drama and these things are happening, and now we're going to go see what's going on with Napoleon. And those sections just didn't ring quite as true, probably because Tolstoy couldn't do, you know, the same exploration of character because they're not fictional characters. They're real historical people. So there's only so many liberties that you can take with that when you're trying to write something that is historically accurate rather than something that is fictional. From the research that I've done, I think that it is historically accurate. I haven't done extensive research though, but I've just heard that his stuff is historically accurate, unlike Victor Hugo's and Les Mis. But I felt like Les Mis was a better payoff. I felt like the end of the story was wonderful, it was beautiful. I cried so many times, and I definitely didn't have the same like emotional attachment to War and Peace that I did to Les Mis. So even though Les Mis I would not call a perfect book, I felt like I had to give it 5 stars because it felt like a masterpiece. It was so well done. The ending justified all the time it took for me to get there. And I didn't necessarily feel the same way about War and Peace, though I did enjoy it. I'm glad I read it, and I will reread it. I think I ended up giving War and Peace 4 stars because it just wasn't quite what I expected it to be, because people talk about thinking about the characters for a super long time and like how deeply impactful it was. And while I did get attached to the characters, I didn't have the same like emotional impact that I did when I read Les Mis. So I kind of compared those books a lot while I was reading because stylistically they were similar to me. But even in terms of like Anna Karenina, which I think is shorter than War and Peace and Les Mis. Les Mis and War and Peace are about the same length. I think they're both around 1,300 pages in the editions that I have. And I think Anna Karenina is less. But Anna Karenina, I read like within a week because I couldn't put it down, and it was so good. And there were times of meandering, of philosophizing, of descriptions of farmland. There were things that were not like perfectly paced, I guess, but it felt very worth it. And it felt like it was worth the investment of time, and that the ending made up for any parts that were maybe a little more difficult to get through. And War and Peace just wasn't quite there for me. So don't let that deter you from reading it, because I did, like I said, I really enjoyed it. 4 stars is a really good rating for me. I was expecting to give it 5 stars. I was expecting to be like head over heels with this book because I love Russian literature, and this is just considered like some of the ultimate in Russian literature. And what this proved to me is that I think overall just like Dostoevsky is a more favorite author for me than Tolstoy, which is fine. I just like Dostoevsky's style and exploration just a little bit better. I often connect with his characters just a little bit better, and well, I can't say that Dostoevsky's pacing is always perfect either, because he goes off into tangents, although they're usually not historically based. They're usually like philosophy and religion. So, but I usually am into that. Well, those are my final thoughts on War and Peace. I did not like organize this big thing of notes before I recorded this video, so there may be things that I'm kind of forgetting. If you have read War and Peace, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you feel like it was worth the length? Do you feel like it was paced well? Did you have an issue too with the switching between historical and fictional characters? Because I know that some people rate this book like 5 stars and it's a favorite book of all time. It's very beloved. It has stood the test of time, and rightfully so, but it just didn't quite meet my hopeful expectations of 5 stars. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.